The moon hung low in the velvety night sky, casting an eerie glow over the wide expanse of rolling hills and untamed fields. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote howled, its voice piercing the silence like a warning siren. It was a peaceful night, or at least it was supposed to be. Old Farmer Jeb sat on his porch, a weathered figure silhouetted against the soft light of the farmhouse, sipping his lukewarm coffee. He leaned back in his creaky chair, his eyes scanning the darkness. There was something peculiar about the night, an unsettling stillness that stirred a primal instinct deep within him. He could feel it in his bones, an inexplicable tension that seemed to snake around him like a tightening noose. Suddenly, the tranquility shattered. A series of loud, raucous voices erupted from the edge of his property. Jeb jolted upright, heart pounding in his chest. Shadows flitted beneath the trees, looking like specters lurking in the dark. He set his coffee cup down, the lukewarm liquid splashing across the wooden porch. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he strained to hear the commotion outside. "Oi, let's get this over with." One of the voices barked. Criminals, thieves, unscrupulous men with dirty hands and greed bubbling in their eyes. Jeb's chest clenched. They were coming for his livestock, his livelihood, the heart of all he had built. He had lived on this ranch for over 4 decades. This land was his pride and joy, nothing more than a series of dirt and grass to outsiders, but to him it was the embodiment of his dreams and struggles. His grandfather had farmed here, his father too, and now it was his turn to defend this legacy. As the men approached, their figures jagged and menacing against the silver backdrop, Jeb felt a sudden calm wash over him. He had a plan. He didn't just have a shotgun stored behind the door for show, he had something much sharper. Picking up a sturdy wooden bat, he crept carefully toward the back door, stepping lightly to avoid creaking the floorboards. The thieves laughed, exchanging crude jokes. With every chuckle, Jeb's resolve solidified. He was not about to let them dismantle his entire life for the sake of a few quick bucks. He glanced out the window just in time to see 3 men jump the fence, eyes gleaming with mischief and malice. They were loaded with heavy-duty bags, the kind that could carry nothing but stolen goods. Jeb gritted his teeth, reaching for the porch light. It flickered on, illuminating the men in the yard like some kind of spotlight show. Jeb called out. His voice had more strength than he felt. The intruders froze, caught off guard. They exchanged glances, the bravado slipping off their faces like a cheap costume. "Just passing through, old man. No harm meant," the leader said, trying to put on a brave front, hands raised in mock surrender. Jeb chuckled darkly. He could see the fear flickering in their eyes just beneath the bravado. "You're not that good at lying, son," he replied. One of the men barked a laugh and took a step forward, but Jeb was ready. "You don't want to try me, turn around and walk away. You've got 10 seconds, he warned, tightening his grip on the bat. It was then that Jeb noticed something glimmer in the leader's pocket, a knife reflecting the light. Tension crackled in the air, thick and electric. Jeb's heart raced, but he stood firm, feet planted like the sturdy oak trees that surrounded him. 10, he began counting, voice low and controlled. Before he could reach 5, there was a sudden rustling in the grass behind him. He turned just as his loyal cattle dog, Rusty, erupted from beneath the porch, barking fiercely. "Jeb, Jeb." Rusty's voice was desperate and loud. That was all it took. Panic filled the air like smoke. The men froze, their bravado crumbling as Rusty made his presence known, growling and barking. Jeb saw the flash of fear in their eyes and grinned. He knew they weren't ready to face what they had stirred up. "Run now, or my dog will bite," Jeb warned, voice steady. They didn't need time to think. The trio turned and fled, stumbling over their own feet, fear propelling them into the darkness. But Jeb wasn't going to let them escape that easily. He ran after them, bat swinging, fueled by adrenaline. He shouted. He wasn't just fighting for his ranch. He was fighting for all those years of hard work, for every drop of sweat that had seeped into this land. But the thieves were quick, sprinting with serpentine movements, zigzagging through the trees. Jeb was older, but years spent working the fields had given him strength. He was surprisingly spry. Rusty zoomed past, barking as if his life depended on it, a constant reminder that they weren't alone. The chase led them deep into the woods that edged the property, where the moonlight barely reached. The men thought they could use the cover to lose him, but Jeb had another trick up his sleeve. He had set up bear traps around the perimeter, a precaution he had taken after hearing whispers of a nearby gang planning surreptitious raids. It was the last thing they heard before a loud snap echoed through the woods. The lead man careened to the side with a howl that pierced the night. He had stepped directly into one of Jeb's traps, the metal jaws clamping down on his leg like a predator. The second man froze, eyes wide with fear. His moment of hesitation slipped by, and before he could decide on a path forward, Rusty lunged at him like a lightning bolt, teeth bared and growling ferociously. The man stumbled backward, his foot caught on an exposed root, falling hard to the ground with a gasp. In a flash, Jeb was upon them, bat raised. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable, swirling with a mix of terror and regret. "Now," Jeb said, breathing heavily, "you thought you could come onto my land uninvited. You thought you would run my life into the ground." The third man, realizing the gravity of the situation, dropped his bag. "Please, man, we didn't mean it," he pleaded. Old Farmer Jeb took a moment to assess this chaotic scene, men on the ground, injured and terrified. The moon cast a ghostly glow on all of it, transforming the woods into a surreal battlefield. He lowered the bat slightly, and all at once he felt the weight of his choice. You could take a man out of the fight, but did he really want to punish them further? But just as he was about to reconsider, the lead man cursed loudly, wrenching the trap in pain as he attempted to crawl away. The sound was equal parts desperation and anger, and it snapped Jeb back into focus. "No, you don't get to choose your fate here. You've crossed the line. And now I will make sure you never come back," he declared, his voice crisp and final. Rusty, still poised and ready, edged closer, reinforcing the message like a phantom guardian. Jeb put a hand on his trusty companion, a gesture of solidarity that merely underscored the divide between him and the criminals. "Trust me, you do not want to face the consequences," Jeb said, eyes blazing with resolve. The group, now terrified and desperate, scrambled back, the fear of violence rustling through their veins like wildfire. Jeb illuminated their faces in the pale moonlight and could see they were only boys, tangled in a web of poor choices, greed, and a misguided sense of bravery. Jeb shouted more firmly, "And leave." With that, the men stumbled to their feet, flinching as Jeb advanced, bat in hand, grounding them in the truth of hard lessons learned on the land. Without another word, they retreated, weaving through the trees like frightened deer. Jeb watched them disappear into the darkness until he could no longer hear their voices. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders but couldn't dismiss the twinge of moral agony. He muttered, staring into the abyss. In that moment, beneath the aged oak that had been his sanctuary, Farmer Jeb knew he had protected his home, this land of sunrises, hard work, and dreams. But a part of him wondered about the lives he'd just changed. He'd stood tall, defiant, and victorious, but behind that pride lay the intricate tapestry of choices, mistakes, and paths not taken. Sitting back on his porch, with the smell of earth in the air and Rusty curled at his feet, he let out a deep sigh. There would always be shadows lurking, hungry for the light, but just as he defended his own world, he would always find a way to confront them head-on. After all, this was more than just a fight for land. It was a battle for legacy, honor, and the never-ending pursuit of dignity. And Jeb intended to stand firm, no matter what darkness approached. The sun dipped low on the horizon, sinking into a pool of molten gold, casting the ranch in shades of fiery orange and deepening purple. Farmer Tom sat on his creaking porch, the familiar creak of the wood echoing against the syncopated calls of crickets and the rustle of the wind through the tall grass. To most, this was just another quiet evening on the edge of nowhere, a serene landscape filled with hope and hard work. But to Tom, something felt amiss. It hung in the air like electricity, a persistent buzz of tension that set his nerves on edge. He took a deep breath, the sweet smell of hay and freshly turned earth mixed with something darker fear. He shook off the feeling. It was probably just his mind playing tricks. Plenty of hours alone out here had a way of amplifying worries. But then he heard it. Distinct sounds, fading in and out like the pulse of an approaching storm. A group of voices emerged from the tree line, a harsh burst of laughter, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal clanking together. Fear twisted in Tom's gut. He quickly rose from the porch, heart racing, squinting toward the sound. There, just beyond his property line, he could see shadows moving. 3 men, rough and ragged, the kind of figures that sent a chill down your spine without you even knowing why. Their laughter turned sinister, and their body language screamed tension. These weren't just run-of-the-mill trespassers. They were trouble. "They're here for the cattle," Tom whispered to himself, gripping the edge of the porch railing. Panic surged through him, but it was quickly replaced by something more primal. Resolute, he took a step inside, the coolness of the air contrasting sharply with the heat throbbing in his chest. He had worked years for this ranch. Blood, sweat, and tears poured into every inch of land. The thought of losing it, of scoundrels stealing away the fruits of his labor, ignited a fire within. Tom wasn't planning on letting that happen. Grabbing his old rifle, still reliable despite its age, Tom moved back outside, stepping quietly off the porch and onto the soft earth. He had no intentions of confronting these men without knowing what they were capable of. Positioning himself behind a cluster of trees, Tom peered out just in time to see the intruders break through the underbrush. They were heavier set, clothes tarnished, possibly a gang from the nearby town looking for an easy payday. Their voices rose in volume, thick with bravado, as they discussed their plan like it was a casual game of cards. "Let's grab what we can and hit the road. These farmers are too soft to put up a fight," one sneered, glancing around as if the very land could betray him. Soft. The nerve of these fools. Fire ignited within Tom, not just for his cattle but for the years of diligence and hard labor that made this ranch a home. He made up his mind. They thought they could waltz in and take what was his without consequence. Not on his watch. Tom took a deep breath, his instincts honing in. He had a plan, not just any plan, but a strategy. He recalled the lessons he learned from years of farming. Problem-solving was half his job. These men were hunters, but he was going to turn that game on its head. He reached a small shed not far from where he stood, memories flooding back of long days fixing machinery and teaching his children about the importance of perseverance. Inside, he found exactly what he needed: old tarps, a few pieces of heavy scrap metal, and some ropes. He could make something out of nothing, just like his father had taught him. Slipping back behind the trees, he spread the tarps out on the ground, carefully arranging them so that from a distance they blended into the backdrop of the bushes. Tom then laid pieces of metal atop them, creating a makeshift barrier. The gang wouldn't see it until they were right on top, and that was when he would strike. The planning took only a few minutes, but he felt the seconds pulling tightly like a drawn bowstring. There was no room for error. Once he had the barrier in place, Tom stepped away, positioning himself deeper in the bushes, heart racing, rifle clutched tight, eyes steady on the group. Minutes turned to what felt like hours as he watched the men shift, their egos inflating with their chatter. A part of him felt something tugging at his conscience, reminding him of the principles he lived by, the ones that told him to treat others with respect. But these men were the kind that took advantage, the kind that ruined lives in pursuit of their own selfish ambitions. "All right, let's grab the cattle over there," the leader said, pointing toward the dense pasture that flowed behind his home. Tom's breath quickened. They had no idea what was about to hit them. He steadied himself, a fierce determination glowing in his chest. He could almost hear the heartbeat of the land, a profound connection drawing on the strength of generations before him. Then it happened, the sound of footsteps crunching against the leaves, laughter morphing into shouts as the thugs darted in different directions, fanning out, searching, ready to plunder the merest hint of livestock. "Hey!" One yelled, sensing movement beneath his feet. That's when they crossed the mental line. Without hesitation, Tom squeezed the trigger and fired a shot into the air. The bang echoed like thunder, instantly silencing the din. All eyes snapped toward the sound, confusion etched on their faces. "Who's out there?" the leader shouted, pulling out a knife, adrenaline coursing through him like poison. Tom stepped forward, heart pounding in sync with his resolve. "You're trespassing," he bellowed, his voice solid and intimidating. "Get off my land or you'll regret it." The men flinched, shifting nervously. They hadn't expected a confrontation, certainly not from an old farmer standing behind a rifle. One of them shouted back, attempting to regain control of the situation. Tom tightened his grip, feeling the weight of his choice. "You think you can just take what's mine? You're mistaken," he said, his voice unwavering. The clock ticked down in the silence, tension hanging thick like clouds before a storm. Each man looked at one another uncertain, the bravado fading like smoke on the wind. Their faces reflected a dangerous mix of challenge and it just might be time to go. From his vantage point, Tom could see the palpable fear flickering in their eyes. He'd studied their patterns, understood their instincts, played his cards expertly. This was not just about the livestock. This was a duel of wits, a defense of everything he and his family stood for. "Y'all think you're tough," he shouted, pushing the limit, knowing that fear could do strange things to a person's bravado. The leader barked a laugh, but it was hollow, cracking under the surface. "You're just one man. You think you can take us," but before he could finish, a loud crash erupted as one of his men tripped on the scrapped metal, tumbling headfirst into the hidden trap Tom had set. The sound echoed through the trees, a slap of chaos that shattered the thin veneer of confidence. In an instant, panic set in. Tom saw the two remaining men scramble toward the fallen figure, their unity dissolved into disarray. In that split second, Tom knew it was his chance. He yelled, charging out from his hiding place, moving with a speed that seemed to surprise even him. Surprise fueled his momentum as the sound of his heavy boots thudded against the ground, carrying the weight of defiance. The remaining thieves turned, eyes wide in disbelief. Their leader, who had been the loudest, now trembled like a leaf in the wind. Tom's heart surged as he saw the fear transform their faces into masks of horror. He commanded, lowering the rifle just enough to make his intentions clear. "Wait, we didn't mean," one of them stammered, but the determination behind Tom's gaze cut him off. They were trapped not only by his words but by their own choices, their bravado stripped down to raw emotion. With the momentum still on his side, Tom pressed forward. Each word dripped with ironclad resolve, every syllable echoing the value of his labor and the history behind his land. The fallen man let out a pained grunt just then, and that snapped the tether completely. The remaining two thieves turned and fled, wild-eyed and desperate, their panic propelling them into the dark embrace of the woods. In the aftermath, the quiet echoed louder than the chaos that had preceded it. Tom stood tall, chest heaving from exertion, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within. He walked over to the trap, the man now caught in a snare he had set. "You boys shouldn't have messed with the ranch," Tom said, the weight of the situation pressing down heavily on him. The fallen thug groaned, and there was something almost human beneath the bravado fear, a flicker of regret mingling with their crime. Tom took a breath, knowing that sometimes the hardest battles were those fought within. Consider this a lesson. With that, Tom stepped back, giving a firm nod to the figure caught in the trap as he faded into the shadows, the echoes of triumph cascading through the heaviness of the night. That evening, as stars twinkled overhead and the chill settled into the air, Farmer Tom sat back down on his porch. Rustling leaves and chirping crickets filled the silence where chaos had dwelled. The weight of the confrontation settled on him, leaving behind both exhaustion and a strange sense of victory. He had conquered not only the threat but also the darker aspects of himself, the balance between fear and courage, between aggression and empathy. For all that he had faced and all that he had done, he knew he had won this day, and with it, he had protected not just his ranch, but a legacy that would carry on for generations to come. As the cool breeze wrapped around him like a comforting embrace, Tom let out a strong exhale, relief coursing through him. The sun had set on another day, but the fight for this land, his land, would continue, fueled by that same unwavering spirit that had seen him through each season on the ranch. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the earthy scent of rain and promises of a new day. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling expanse of the Jansen family ranch. Farmer Sam Jansen stepped out of his weather-beaten house, the wood creaking under his weight like an old friend reminding him of the years gone by. Today felt different, though. A subtle unease gnawed at his gut, as if nature itself was hinting at trouble. Sam took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air. He had always listened to that nagging voice inside. It was what had kept his ranch thriving through good times and bad. And today it was screaming. As he moved toward the barn, he heard a noise just beyond the tree line, a sharp crack like a twig snapping under pressure. He stopped, squinting into the distance, his instincts kicking in. The cows were still scattered in the pasture, munching on grass, blissfully unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. But Sam wasn't blind to the signs. His ranch had become a target for a local gang known for terrorizing nearby farmers, stealing livestock and laying waste wherever they tread. Rumors of their latest escapades had spread like wildfire, and Sam had fought to keep those fears at bay. But now, as the sound echoed again, it was clear. His fears were grounding themselves in reality. Without a second thought, Sam ducked behind the barn, listening intently. Heavy footsteps, muffled voices. They were getting closer. His heart raced, pounding against his ribcage like a war drum. What would he do if they crossed that line? It wasn't just about the cattle. His entire life was woven into the fabric of this land. Generations of Jansons had poured their sweat and tears into these fields, and he wasn't about to let a pack of scoundrels rip that apart. Determination surged through him. He had to act, and he had to be smart. Sam reached into the barn, grabbing the old baseball bat his son had left lying around. It was heavy, but it felt right in his grip, a symbol of defense. But he had something far more cunning in mind than brute force. He remembered the traps he had set around the perimeter last fall, meant to catch pesky raccoons. Would they serve a different purpose today? He smirked at the thought. Just as he began to maneuver his way toward the tree line, something caught his eye. There they were, the three men creeping closer, their silhouettes jagged against the landscape. They moved with purpose, eyes darting about like animals tracking their prey. It was now or never. Sam ducked low, developing a plan faster than a jackrabbit running for its life. His first target, the leader, a tall, burly figure with tattoos stretching down his forearms, a walking warning that he meant business. The second was lanky, unpredictable, always laughing at something no one else could see. The third, the one Sam dreaded most, was quiet, almost serpentine, scanning the area with a sharp gaze. He had heard stories about him. He had a reputation for being ruthless. As the group edged closer to the fence, Sam took his opportunity. He darted behind a series of boulders, positioning himself so he could throw small stones, making it sound like something was moving further down the field. The gang glanced toward the noise, suspicion dancing in their eyes. The leader asked, brow furrowed, "Probably just a deer. Let's just grab the cattle already," the lanky one replied, impatience underlying his tone. But Sam had only just begun. He sneaked back toward the barn, heart pounding in his ears, knowing every second counted. He grabbed a handful of hay and repositioned himself, ready to create a distraction. With a swift motion, he tossed the hay along the ground, letting the wind do its work. Soon enough, it rustled against the wooden fence, imitating the sound of something larger moving in the shadows. The leader whispered, clearly agitated. Sam could practically feel their fear mingling with his adrenaline. They were youthful, reckless, and caught up in a dangerous fantasy. But to him, it was a deadly game of survival. "Let's check it out," the leader said. As they advanced, Sam seized his chance again. He sprinted to the edge of the barn, yanking a tarp from the top of a stack of materials. Quickly, he draped it over a nearby cattle trailer, knowing it would blend into the environment. First impressions mattered most in a surprise attack. With a deep breath, Sam glanced back toward the gang. They were nearing the trailer now, curiosity getting the better of their caution. It was time for the final act of his plan. He slipped behind the trailer, clinging to the ground, and readied himself to spring into action. "Come on," the lanky one joked, tossing a glance at the leader. Sam stifled a snicker. He had become the predator stalking these so-called hunters. Just as they stood at the threshold, he leaped up, wielding the bat. He shouted with the might of a roaring lion. The gang jumped, surprise plastered across their faces. The leader fumbled for his knife, eyes wide. But Sam didn't give them the chance. With a powerful swing, he took a step forward. The sound was like thunder, echoing through the open air as the bat struck the ground near the closest man's feet. They staggered back, panic enveloping them like a thick fog. Sam yelled, voice reverberating with authority. In that moment, Sam was not just defending his property. He was the fiery spirit of those who had come before him, the farmers, the ranchers, the unsung heroes who had forged a life from nothing. He felt the energy of the land rushing through him, and suddenly the odds didn't seem stacked against him anymore. Shouted the leader, panic shattering their bravado. They turned, sprinting back into the thick of the trees, stumbling over roots and rocks. Sam felt a heady rush of satisfaction but kept his grip tight on the bat. He wouldn't consider the fight over until he was sure they were gone for good. Rushing forward, he set his sights on the closest path down to the creek, knowing these men wouldn't be making any daring comebacks. As he rounded the corner, he noticed them in a messy formation, debating whether to stand and fight or flee. The quiet one, the one he feared most, hesitated before throwing down a few choice words. But Sam met them with clarity. Continuing his pursuit, he approached the traps he had laid earlier, and his heart sank as he considered a possibility. They were now halfway toward the creek. If they crossed, they'd be out of his reach. With quick instincts, he raced faster, skimming the ground, eyes locked on them. They were trapped in the age-old cycle of fear. It could easily push them over the edge. Sam bellowed, and to his relief they froze. It was a revelation, not just for them, but for him, too. In a flash, he realized he had been fighting more than his ranch. He was fighting for his family, his legacy, the very spirit of what it meant to stand firm against the tide. With sheer resolve carrying him, Sam pointed his bat forward, standing solid, feet anchored. The leader looked at the others, uncertainty blossoming across their faces. The quiet one shouted, but it was too late. Sam had them cornered now. The group wasted no time, adrenaline propelling them back the way they came. They were wild, darting in different directions as they scrambled to escape, realization dawning heavy on their shoulders. As they fled deeper into the woods, Sam couldn't help but let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. He had defended his ranch, with wits sharp as nails. He realized, too, this was about more than hardware and might, it was about heart. Ryder, his old horse, snickered from the barn, sensing the commotion. Sam walked back, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. He couldn't help but smile. The sun hung higher in the sky now, illuminating the fields like a golden tapestry. When he reached Ryder, he gently stroked his muzzle, inhaling deeply. A sense of peace washed over him. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message to everyone who dared stand in his path. The dangers of the world would always linger in the shadows, but Sam had stood his ground. Armed with courage and a plan, he'd faced down adversity, and in the depths of conflict, he had found strength. From that day forward, the whispers of fear would swirl around town, but they would also carry a new tale, one of a farmer who had faced off against chaos and emerged unbroken, a stalwart protector of his land. And as the sun set on the horizon, Sam knew the ranch would remain a sanctuary, steadfast and unyielding, holding stories of resilience passed down through generations, rising like a phoenix each time it faced the fire. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a blood-orange glow over the sprawling fields. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the rhythmic clucking of chickens and the distant mooing of cows. It was an ordinary evening on the Johnson ranch. At least, it was supposed to be. Then a sound shattered the calm, cutting through the tranquility like a jagged knife. From the tree line on the far side of the property came the unmistakable rattle of stolen laughter, crude and full of malice. Farmer Jake Johnson's heart sank. He had felt the tension creeping into town lately, whispers about a local gang that had been terrorizing nearby farms, stealing livestock, and leaving nothing but chaos behind. Jake's instincts told him that tonight, the gang intended to come for his family's livelihood. Pausing, Jake leaned against the weathered fence, his hands gripping the splintered wood. Memories flooded back, the scent of sweat and earth mixed with the sounds of his children's laughter echoing in the distance. This land had been in the Johnson family for generations. It was more than just dirt and crops. It was a legacy woven with hard work, perseverance, and hope. "Not on my watch," he muttered. The flicker of determination ignited in his chest. He quickly scanned the surroundings. He knew that fumbling fear would only spell disaster. The time for action had come, and he had to outsmart them. Sneaking from the fence, he moved silently into the darkness, each step measured. He slipped into the barn, a safe hideaway filled with tools and old memories. He had nearly the entire toolbox at his disposal, but tonight he needed to think fast. Grabbing a rope and some old tarps, he set to work, moving with intention. The barn, once a sanctuary, morphed into a strategic headquarters. He planned to outmaneuver these criminals, not just with sheer force but with cunning, the way his ancestors had done before him. As he set up traps near the pasture, the muffled commotion grew louder. The gang was getting restless, moving closer to the sound of livestock. Jake pressed flat on the ground, the cool earth beneath him sending shockwaves of purpose through his spine. He could barely make out their shapes. 3 men, each sporting the rough look of someone who believed they could take anything they wanted without a second thought. With his heart racing, Jake remembered the stories he'd heard from old-timers in town, talk of clever methods farmers used to fend off thieves. It was time to put those stories to good use. The gang crept through the towering grass, shadows dancing around them like phantoms. Their laughter pierced the air, rough-edged but tinged with unease. They would soon realize they were on borrowed time. As Jake set up the last tarp, he heard their voices murmur. "Grab that one in the corner. Big bucks if we get a few calves tonight," one of them called, his tone oozing confidence. And suddenly Jake had an idea. He grabbed a few empty feed buckets and set them against a fence post just out of sight of the criminals. If he could make just the right noise, he might be able to distract them long enough to enact his true plan. With one swift motion, he flung a rock at the buckets, creating a loud, clattering sound. Instantly, their voices ceased. The gang exchanged frantic glances, their bravado chipped away by uncertainty. The leader said, scanning the area like a hawk spotting danger. "Just some stupid animal, let's go," another murmured, but doubt pierced his voice. Jake seized the moment, adrenaline surging through him as he darted behind the barn, positioning himself for the next part of his plan. He peered around the corner, bat in hand, ready to act. The leader seemed tired of waiting. "Come on, it's just a noise," he barked, pushing his comrades forward. They stepped forward, moving toward the sound that Jake had used as bait. Jake's heart raced, but the thrill of empowerment surged. This was his land, he would defend it with everything he had. Just as they neared the pasture, he sprang into action. With a powerful swing, he dashed out from the shadows of the barn, confronting them head-on. He shouted, the weight of defiance heavy in his voice. The gang halted, confusion morphing into shock as they turned to face him. The sight of an old farmer wielding a baseball bat was perhaps not what they expected. Jake could see their confidence shatter like fragile glass. The leader snarled, suddenly abandoning their bravado. "I'm the man standing between you and what you want to steal," Jake replied firmly. Faced with such unexpected resistance, the criminals exchanged fearful glances. In that brief moment, Jake could see fear crack the surface of their bravado. They were just kids, really youthful ambition sending them down a path they didn't know how to navigate. The lanky one hesitated first. "Maybe we should," but his words were cut off by a sudden crash behind them. One of Jake's traps had sprung, the metallic snap echoing through the night. Suddenly, the fear that had been simmering in the air erupted into chaos. The 3 men stumbled back, eyes wide in terror. They turned and ran, not just away from Jake, but into a familiar trap of their own making. Jake shouted, adrenaline coursing through him as he advanced. He swung the bat violently in the air, but rather than chase them with threats, he had a different idea. He needed to drive home the lesson. The challenge echoed behind him, urging them to reconsider what they had set out to do. Each word dripped with empowerment, the spirit of resilience lighting a fire in his chest. With one last look, the gang darted from the field, vanishing into the safety of the treetops, their laughter replaced by the profound silence of the night. Jake lowered the bat, letting out a deep breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Victory surged through his veins, but more than that, a sense of peace washed over him. He had defended his home, yes, but he also defended a legacy that would live on through every challenge and triumph, marrying the stories of the past with the hope of the future. As the stars twinkled overhead, he felt the weight of his ancestors wash over him, a lineage of farmers who had faced struggles and emerged more resilient. This land was a tapestry woven with dreams, and he would fight to keep it intact. Jake wandered back toward the barn, the quiet slowly creeping back into the evening. He leaned against the barn doorway, looking over the expanse of his property, now peaceful once more. The cows grazed in the distance, none the wiser to the tension that had unfolded. The night stretched on, bringing a reminder that while danger could lurk on the horizon, the heart of a farmer beat fiercest when facing the tides of adversity. And tomorrow, like every day before, he would rise with the sun, ready to nurture his land, fiercely protective of the home he cherished. Recalling the resolve that had sparked within him that night, Jake smiled softly. He may have been just one farmer against three criminals, but he had proven that courage and wit could overcome even the toughest of challenges. The bonds of legacy didn't just lie in the earth. They lived on in every heartbeat, whispering tales of resilience to anyone willing to listen. From that day forth, he would stand taller, unyielding, and proud, the steadfast guardian of the ranch, a legacy unbroken, destined to thrive amidst the rolling hills where dreams took root and flourished, just like the Johnson family had always intended. The night was thick with tension, the moon casting eerie shadows across the old Johnson ranch. Silent, as if holding its breath, the land waited. But Farmer Bill Johnson could not shake the feeling settling in his gut like a stone. This wasn't just another night, something was coming. He pulled on his worn boots, the kind that had been through mud, rain, and countless sunrises. The familiar creak of the floorboards echoed in the stillness as he made his way to the kitchen. Bill glanced out the window. Darkness wrapped around his sprawling fields, but in the distance, he could just make out the bonfire flickering near the tree line. "Damn it," he hissed under his breath. The local gang, known to terrorize farmers, had been a constant worry in recent months. They thought they could swagger onto his property, steal his livestock, and cause havoc without repercussion, but not tonight. He wasn't about to let them take away everything he had built. Bill stepped outside and pulled his old hunting rifle from the wall. It had seen better days, but it was sturdy. It had saved more friends than it had harmed. He took a deep breath, trying to quell the flutter of anxiety in his chest. This ranch was more than just a job, it was the very essence of his life. As he moved closer to the creek that lined his property, the faint sound of laughter broke the night's silence, a rough, mocking sound that made his blood boil. He crouched low, heart pounding, legs coiled tightly like springs ready to unleash. Peering through the tall grass, he spotted them, three figures silhouetted against the firelight. They were talking in low voices, but even without hearing clearly, Bill could feel the menace radiating from them. They were laughing, tossing around crude taunts as they plotted their next move. "What do you think?" one said, swaggering a bit too confidently. "Yeah, easy pickings," another chimed in, tossing a rock into the nearby creek, pleased with the splash it made. Bill clenched his jaw. They thought this was a game. The arrogance of youth mixed with a hint of desperation made them dangerous. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He glided back toward the barn, mind racing. He needed a plan, and he needed it quickly. Inside the barn, with its scents of hay and solid wood, he began methodically gathering supplies. A few tarps, some old wooden crates, and his trusty flashlight. With a wave of determination washing over him, Bill began to set up his traps. He hustled, heart racing as he laid out the tarps to create an illusion of movement distracting enough to lure the criminals away from the cattle pens. The sound of their laughter drifted closer, and he could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Once he was satisfied with positioning, he huddled behind a row of hay bales, waiting, pulse quickening with every minute that passed. He could hear their footsteps now, crunching against the dry grass as they ventured deeper into his territory. One of them muttered, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. Bill held his breath, peering through the gaps in the hay, watching them inch closer to the tarps. He prayed that his makeshift plan would work. Everything depended on it. Just then, a sudden noise, a clatter that echoed through the still night. Bill's heart jumped. Had he miscalculated? But no, his plan unfolded perfectly as the tarp flapped wildly under the stir of the wind, creating an illusion of movement. One of the thieves shouted, stopping in his tracks. "Who cares? We're on a tight schedule." The leader replied, urgency replacing their bravado. With a swift motion, they turned toward the cattle pens, but this was precisely where Bill wanted them to go. He recalled a trap he had set earlier meant to catch raccoons. As they moved toward the pen, Bill's heart raced. He had to time this perfectly. The moment they made their choice, he would unleash the next part of his plan. Just as the leader reached for the fence, ready to climb over, Bill sprang into action. He leaped from behind the bales, flashlight blaring like a beacon. He bellowed, voice echoing with authority. The gang froze. The shock on their faces was palpable. These hadn't been strong men, they were boys, caught in a moment of reckless ambition. They never expected to face a farmer ready to defend his home. The leader shouted, stumbling back and knocking into his friend. Without waiting for a second invitation, Bill rushed toward them, the flashlight flickering like a warning sign. "You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine?" The gang turned to flee, panic lighting the night more than any moon ever could. But just as they spun away, one of them met the edge of the trap. The sharp snap echoed in the air, and the lanky one was yanked down, caught solidly, flailing in surprise. He yelled, but the sound of his cries only fueled the fire within Bill. Bill shouted, moving closer. The two remaining gang members hesitated, fear creeping into their expressions. They were no longer the hunters, they were prey, and Bill stood tall, bathed in the glow of the nearby fire. "You got two choices," he growled, stepping forward, camouflaged with the strength of the land and his ancestors behind him. Fear ignited in their eyes, and one whispered urgently to the other. With that, they took off, sprinting through the underbrush, hearts pounding in their chests like caged animals. Bill watched them go, a sense of victory swelling within him, but also a hint of sorrow. They were misguided youth acting out of desperation, but that didn't give them a pass to harm others. "Now let's see about getting you out of there," he said, facing the one still caught in the trap. The kid's eyes were wide with panic, legs thrashing like a trapped animal. "Please, man, don't hurt me," he whimpered, genuinely frightened now. Bill said firmly, approaching the trap with determination. Reluctantly, he crouched down to release the boy, who cringed away at first. "I won't hurt you, but let me be clear, you're not welcome here." With a flick of the trap, the boy was free. He tumbled to the ground, scrambling to his feet. Bill stood tall, a combination of authority and empathy, watching as the boy dashed off into the night to join his comrades. The quiet returned, save for the gentle rustle of the leaves, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. Bill let out a long breath, feeling the tension slowly dissipate. This wasn't just a battle won, it was a testament to his resilience. As he walked back toward his house, he felt the weight of the land behind him, 1,000 stories built upon hard work and perseverance. He had stood his ground, fought off the dangers prowling in the night, and protected what meant the most to him. Under the vast canvas of stars, he stepped onto his porch, a sense of pride washing over him. The farmhouse stood strong against the dark, and he knew no matter what came next, he could face it. He was Farmer Bill Johnson, a guardian of the land, a protector of heritage. With each dawn, he would rise again, ready to tend to the fields, the cattle, and the memories that made this ranch not just a piece of earth, but a cherished home. In the distance, the remnants of a fire flickered, a reminder of the chaos that had almost encroached upon his sanctuary. But the ranch stood unyielding, just like its owner. Every day would bring new challenges, but with heart and grit, he knew he would face them head-on. The cycle of life continued, and the land would remain a steadfast companion, always whispering tales of resilience to anyone willing to listen. As he closed his eyes, the weight of the day fell gently from his shoulders, and the unmistakable sound of the night took over the crickets, the soft rustle of the wind, a lullaby for a farmer ready to dream of a new day. And even in dreams, he would continue to fight for what was right, a protector of his legacy, never backing down from any threat that came his way. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an unsettling glow across the sprawling expanse of the Miller Ranch. Shadows danced nervously between the trees, whispering secrets of danger. Farmer Luke Miller stood on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, heart pounding in rhythm with the rustling leaves around him. It was supposed to be a tranquil night, yet something felt off. An instinct deep within warned him that trouble was lurking just outside his gates. Earlier that day, whispers had reached his ears, rumors about a group of criminals scouring the countryside for easy prey. Farmers were losing livestock, their livelihoods turned into little more than a free buffet for these thieves. And now, those shadows he felt lurking were beginning to take shape. The faint sound of laughter drifted on the wind, taunting him. "Nobody's taking my land," Luke whispered to himself, gripping the railing tightly. His knuckles turned white as he focused on the distant sound. He'd put his heart and soul into this ranch, and he wasn't about to let anyone destroy it. He turned back into the house and grabbed an old baseball bat from the corner, its surface worn and familiar. "All right, if it's a game they want, let's see how good they really are," he murmured. The laughter grew louder, now tinged with the unmistakable bravado of youth. Stepping into the embrace of the night, Luke crept toward the noise, trusting his instincts. He moved deliberately, careful not to make a sound. Each step felt like a preparation for the inevitable showdown. The tension was thick, wrapping around him like a heavy cloak. Suddenly, the underbrush rustled and Luke froze, heart racing. Just beyond the trees, silhouettes emerged, 3 men, youthful yet menacing, swaggering with a false sense of invincibility. They were armed, but not with guns. In their hands were makeshift weapons, bricks and pipes, enough to intimidate but not designed for true fight. "Let's take what we want," one said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Another chimed in, laughter spilling from his lips. Luke's stomach twisted at the thought of them approaching his cattle, the very animals that symbolized his hard work and dedication. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and Luke would make sure they learned that lesson tonight. He ducked behind a thick oak, watching as the gang crept closer. Their laughter faded, replaced by the sounds of their surging excitement as they approached the cattle pens. It was time for action. He had to outsmart them, and he had just the plan. Earlier that week, in anticipation of trouble, Luke had laid out old tarps and food bins to distract any potential thieves. It wasn't his first rodeo. He had learned the tricks in town. He remembered stories of other ranchers facing similar threats and how they had fended off attackers. With stealthy precision, he slipped behind the barn and grabbed a flashbang he'd made from fireworks and an old soda can. Not quite a bomb, but enough to create distraction. As the gang moved closer to the cattle, their silhouettes framed by the low moonlight, Luke readied his makeshift device. "Let's make some noise," he whispered, and with a flick, tossed the flashbang into the center of the cattle pen. The explosion of light and sound erupted, a flash that blinded the gang momentarily. One of them yelped, panic spreading through their ranks like wildfire. Another shouted, the bravado behind their voices cracking under the pressure, replaced by fear. Luke sprang out from behind the oak tree, bat raised high, ready for whatever came next. But the criminals were already scrambling away, retreating quickly into the night, their laughter replaced by sheer terror. Luke called after them, voice strong and commanding. For a moment he stood there, heart racing, adrenaline surging. Victory coursed through him, but he knew the danger could resurface. As much as he had scared them off, he couldn't let his guard down. But then there was movement. One of the gang members, feigning bravery, circled back. This one was quieter and more cunning, the real threat. Luke had felt his presence in the shadows, lurking like a snake ready to strike. Without hesitation, the criminal grabbed a rock and hurled it at Luke, a panicked move born of arrogance. It struck the barn wall with a thud, and just like that, they were back at it, trying to reclaim their pride. Luke shouted, taking a step forward, bat raised once more. The thug shouted back, a tremor of fear in his voice that contradicted his bravado. Luke was fueled by a primal instinct now, the fierce need to protect what was his, igniting a fire within him. He replied, voice steady, unwavering. The shadows danced around him, the world fading into stark contrast as the pale moonlight illuminated the determination in his eyes. He could feel the weight of all the farmers who came before him, holding their ground against threats both seen and unseen. "Let's see how tough you really are," he continued, stepping closer to the edge of the cattle pen, his heart pounding. In that moment the scales tipped. The gang member hesitated, eyes darting from Luke to the shadows behind him. "Let's just forget this," he said, voice shaking now. Luke's heart raced. Each thundering heartbeat was a reminder of why he was there, defending not just the ranch, but the very principles that grounded him. He declared, You need to understand that theft has consequences. The remaining criminals, realizing they were outmatched, scrambled into the brush, their bravado stripped away. Luke stood tall, watching them retreat. The moonlit shadows consumed them, but their fear lingered in the air like a memory. As silence fell once again, Luke leaned against the fence, steadying his breath. He'd won this round. The insidious threat that loomed over his homestead had been repelled, for now. He chuckled softly, the weight of the night lifting as clarity returned. But just as he began to turn back to the house, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching again. His heart sank. Turned, anticipating another confrontation, and there stood the remaining member, his hands raised in mock surrender, but his eyes made it clear he had more than bravado hiding behind the facade. "Hey, I'm just here to talk," the lone thug said, attempting a smile though its crookedness revealed his fear. Luke challenged, shifting his weight in disbelief. "We can work something out," the criminal suggested, a hint of desperation creeping into his words. "I mean, come on, it's just a couple of calves. You know how it is. Tough for you doesn't mean tough for me," Luke shot back, his voice steady. "This isn't a negotiation. You trespassed, and for that you have to face the consequences." In that moment, clarity washed over the younger man's face. It flickered briefly like the dying embers of a fire. He challenged, bravado returning only slightly. "I don't have to scare you. I just have to stand my ground," Luke replied firmly, maintaining eye contact. In that moment, the power of resolve felt palpable, not just for him, but perhaps for the boy before him too. "You don't have to go down this path," Luke added, softer now. "Think about the life you want for yourself." The thug paused, staring hard, contemplating. Luke took a deep breath, allowing the silence to stretch. He had seen this kind of doubt before. In a tryst youth, sometimes all it took was one person to spark a different path. "You have a choice," Luke continued. "Leave tonight and rethink your life." The thief stood there, uncertainty flickering across his face, wrestling with the weight of his choices. This could be a moment of clarity, a chance to turn back. "It's not gonna be easy," the thug finally muttered, wavering. "In life, you're rewarded for hard work," Luke encouraged, inching closer, the compassion in his voice resonating stronger than any confrontation could. "This isn't the answer." After several long seconds, the young man nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I'll leave, but—" The thug turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing just as swiftly as he had appeared. Luke watched him go, heart pounding with the weight of what had transpired. Alone again, he took a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation. He hadn't just defended his ranch. He might have changed a life for the better. As he stepped back into the quiet stillness, everything felt different. The moon was still bright, illuminating the expanse of his hard-fought territory, but this time it was met with a sense of hope rather than just tension. Returning to the porch, Luke allowed himself a sigh of relief. The threats would always loom, but they wouldn't define him. He had stood tall, not with aggression, but with a firm belief in his values. Tomorrow would come, bringing new challenges and new opportunities, and he would meet them as he always had, head held high, ready to protect both his land and his legacy. In the quiet night, filled with the sounds of crickets and soft breezes, Luke knew he could face whatever lay ahead. Above him, the stars twinkled brightly, reflections of the generations past guiding him forward, whispering stories of resilience that fueled his heart. He was Farmer Luke Miller, guardian of the land and the dreams that came with it, ready for whatever adventures awaited him at daybreak. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty fields of the Thompson ranch. Farmer Jake Thompson leaned against the weathered wooden fence, heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. He had lived on this land his whole life, pouring love and effort into every inch, but tonight, an unsettling feeling buzzed like a hornet in his chest. A rustle in the bushes pulled his attention. Instinctively, he reached for the rusty shovel leaning against the fence, knowing it wouldn't do much against whatever or whoever was lurking nearby. The laughter that followed was rough, mocking, and unmistakably from a group of men. One shouted, the bravado thick in his voice. Jake strained to hear more, urgency flooding his veins. These weren't just idle threats. A local gang had been targeting farms, and now it seemed they were venturing into his territory. The weight of fear settled over him like a heavy blanket. He couldn't let them take what he had built. He couldn't let them destroy everything. The wind whispered through the grass as he darted toward the old barn, heart pounding, every muscle primed for action. A plan began to form in his mind. He couldn't just confront them head-on, he had to outsmart them. Inside the barn, familiar scents of hay mixed with old wood enveloped him. He began gathering supplies, an old tarp, a few buckets, and his trusted lasso. He had seen enough westerns to know that sometimes the best way to fight back was by turning the situation to your advantage. He quickly laid the tarp out on the ground near the cattle pen, knowing it would catch the light from the moon. The plan was simple: create a diversion that would lead the gang away from the cattle and into a trap of his own making. As he crouched behind a stack of hay bales, he could hear the gang's laughter getting closer, now barely muffled by the soft sounds of night. Their crude jokes blended with the rustling of the grass. The mix ignited a fire within him. They thought they could waltz in and take whatever they wanted without consequences. They had another thing coming. He glanced over the bales and caught sight of them, 3 men, youthful yet rough around the edges, armed with makeshift weapons. A piece of pipe here, a heavy rock there. They looked like caricatures of criminals, but Jake knew appearances could be deceiving. It was their confidence that made them dangerous. Shouted the leader, his voice booming as he pushed forward, not even glancing at the farmhouse that stood sentinel in the distance. Jake's heart raced. This was his moment. He lifted the flashlight he had brought with him, prepared to cut through the darkness. Just as they reached the cattle pen, he flicked it on, letting the beam slice through the shadows, illuminating their faces. He bellowed, stepping out from behind the bales. The sound echoed across the quiet fields, slicing through the bravado like a knife. The gang stopped dead in their tracks, eyes wide with disbelief. The leader stammered, the confidence draining from his face. Jake shot back, advancing toward them, shovel raised high. For a moment they hesitated, glancing at one another, weighing their options. But the risk of confrontation with a determined farmer didn't seem like a smart gamble. Just as they began to back away, Jake had to act fast. He yelled. His voice, full of raw energy and conviction, filled the air, echoing off the walls of the barn. The big guy cursed under his breath, glancing behind him as if expecting an escape route to open up. He hissed to the others, his bravado faltering, but the fear in his eyes told a different story. "Let's just go," said the lanky one, looking visibly shaken. Just then, as if the universe had aligned with Jake's resolve, he swung the flashlight wider, creating an illusion of movement in the shadows. The gang members flinched, real fear now gripping them. "Look, I know you're scared," Jake said, softer this time, lowering the shovel just a bit. "You don't have to do this." But the leader couldn't afford to lose face. He yelled, raising his makeshift weapon. With adrenaline pumping, Jake took a step forward, holding the shovel tightly. "You don't need to fight." It was then that the leader let out a wild, desperate laugh. "What are you gonna do? Swing that shovel at us?" But Jake knew this wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a fight for everything he held dear. He wasn't just defending the ranch. He was standing up for years of hard work, generations of his family who had cultivated this land. "I'll protect what's mine with everything I have," he declared, eyes locked on the gang. The tension hung thick in the air, each heartbeat pounding louder than the last. The gang faltered, uncertain. Just when it seemed they might bolt, Jake's instincts kicked in. This was the moment. Dust and shadows, he shouted unexpectedly, gesturing toward the barn. The distraction worked. The gang members, startled and confused by his sudden shift, shifted their eyes to the motion, and that gave him an edge. Now was the time. He threw the flashlight onto the tarp, using it to create a blinding reflection that would distract them just long enough for him to make a move. He screamed, charging forward with the shovel in hand, not intending to fight but to scare them into submission. Shrieked the leanest one, turning on his heel and darting into the night without a second thought. Jake watched as the other 2 faltered, panic flooding their expressions. They staggered back, glancing between Jake and the looming barn, uncertain of their next move. Jake feigned a swing, losing some balances as he thrust the shovel forward, teeth gritted in determination. The leader, now filled with fear, looked like a trapped animal. He shouted, stumbling away, trying to corral his remaining companion. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Jake lunged, catching them off guard. "You picked the wrong ranch." The thunderous authority in his voice turned the atmosphere electric. Just as they turned to run, something caught the foot of the leader one of Jake's cleverly laid traps. The metal snap echoed through the night as the leader stumbled hard, falling face first into the dirt. Flat on the ground, he could only scoff, humiliation etched into his features. He yelled, scrambling to get back up, panic evident as he glanced around for help. Jake moved closer, shovel raised, ready to seize the moment. "This is your last chance." The remaining thug, driven by sheer panic, darted off into the dark, the sound of his feet pounding into the earth quickly fading away. Jake focused on the leader, who was still struggling on the ground, caught in the trap, desperation clear in his eyes. He pleaded, voice trembling now. This wasn't an encounter Jake had anticipated. He had fought hard to protect his home, yet staring down at the young man before him, he felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, pity, and an undeniable urge to teach a lesson. Jake said, grounding himself in the moment, "This isn't how you want your life to go." The thug's eyes softened momentarily, doubt creeping in. "I didn't want to do this," he whispered. "You've got time to change," Jake replied, his voice steady but kind. "When you think of what you're doing, know there are always better choices." The boy nodded slowly, embarrassment washing over his face as he realized the gravity of his actions. In that moment, Jake saw a life teetering on the edge of decision point that could lead to something better if only the boy grasped the opportunity. Jake turned on his heel, taking a step back, leaving the boy caught in the trap to contemplate. "You need to make your choice. I'll be watching." Just then a new sound reached his ears, a distant engine roaring to life, too close for comfort. His instincts kicked in. The gang hadn't left for good, they were regrouping, calling for backup. Jake turned back to face the boy one last time. "Think about it." With that, he sprinted toward the house, adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he reached the porch, he could see the shadows of two vehicles approaching, low and sinister against the moonlit backdrop of the fields. The night had just taken a darker turn, and Jake felt the weight of his decision pressing down like a shroud. He wasn't just a farmer. He was now a man defending his home from a storm brewing on the horizon. The headlights flickered like warning signs, illuminating the dirt path leading up to his porch. He gripped the shovel tighter, resolve washing over him like an unyielding tide. He had fought off danger before, but this felt different. The moment stretched like elastic, the air electric with uncertainty. As the vehicles rolled to a stop, the faces of new gang members materialized from the shadows, their eyes cold and unyielding. "I hope you're ready for a real fight, farmer," the leader of the new gang sneered, stepping out with a confidence born of numbers. Jake took a steadying breath, ready to face whatever might come next. He was not just fighting for himself or the ranch. He was standing against the tides of fear and chaos, ready to protect the life he had built. But just as he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, the ground rumbled beneath him, and a figure stepped out from behind the barn, none other than the young thug he had just released, a fire igniting in his eyes. "Stop." Jake felt a rush of disbelief and hope, realizing that together they might just have a chance. The tension surged, the air thick with danger and possibility as they faced down the gathering storm. And in that moment of uncertainty, the clash of wills hung in the balance, setting the stage for a battle neither could predict.